Afternoon, everybody. Woohoo, it's a lively crowd. Why don't you all come sit up here with us? No, really, this is a really great topic, really important topic. I mean, we get lots of, companies kind of ignoring this topic, and it's something that we all need to address in the industry. So anyway, let's start out with brief introductions, and what we'll do is I'll just introduce myself really quickly. The panelists will introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the questions. Now, obviously, with such a small audience, we can be a bit more interactive, so I'll probably every now and then sort of prompt you guys for a question or two if you have one, and if not, we'll just continue on with what we've got on the list or the discussion that we're currently having. So a little bit about myself. I am Jason Thibeault. I'm the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance. We are an SDO, which is Standards Definition Organization. We work with companies across the ecosystem to help develop guidelines, best practices, specs, functional requirements to address some of the big challenges in the streaming video experience at scale. So we have lots of working groups and companies like network operators and service providers and content owners and technology companies that all come together and try to figure these things out. We publish documents and then we make them available to everyone in the industry so that we can all create a better viewer experience. All right, so let's introduce our panelists for today. So we'll just go from left to right, and we'll start off with Chris.
Sure, I'm Chris Sass. I'm head of technical sales for Synamedia. I run our MSO, telco, and media practices, focused on security as well. For those of you that don't know Synamedia yet, Synamedia was a divestiture. We were part of Cisco for some period of time, and we're a large video company. We do everything end to end. If you go from the head end to client, we're a part of that entire ecosystem. So that's what we do. Thank you.
Fantastic. Olga.
Hi, I'm Olga Kornienko. I am the co-founder and CEO of EZDRM. We are the original DRM as a service hosted provider. And we've been in business since 2003, and the goal of our company is to make DRM as easy, as seamless as possible, and to emphasize the positive role of security in creating businesses and maintaining business models so that the whole industry can be a healthy and functional industry.
Fantastic. And last, Matt.
Matt Tooley. I'm the Vice President of Broadband Technology at the NCTA, which is the Internet and Television Association, which really means we're the trade association for the cable companies, and so we represent both the cable TV channels that you know and the cable TV companies that you guys get your broadband and TV service from. And I work closely with our video piracy working group on video piracy issues. And I work on other technical issues like cybersecurity and other fun things that nobody wants to talk about.
That's the problem. Nobody seems to want to talk about security. So just to put this in a little bit of context, obviously streaming is growing in popularity, and so is piracy. So we talked to, I had a conversation with a North American operator about midway last year, and they're a big operator, and they have guesstimate about 12% of their subscribers are illegally streaming content. And the reason they know this is because those are 12% of their customers who are not TV subscribers, but broadband only. And so they have a full TV offering. And it's significant, right? you're talking about losses of billions of dollars per year for major operators, not to mention the impact that has on rights holders, et cetera. And so part of the problem is, how do you stop these people? What do you do technologically? What do you do process-wise? And so that's kind of what we want to talk about here today, is a little bit of the technology, a little bit of the business, a little bit of the process, and try to talk about and figure out and discuss, are there ways that are being tackled today where rights holders are working with network operators or working with service providers to try to figure out how to stem the flow of illegally streamed content or stolen content from reaching the hands of normal consumers who, to be frank, don't want to pay for content. So let's start out with something from a little bit kind of a high level, just to really set the groundwork. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of call on one person to start, and then we'll sort of open up the discussion amongst the panelists. But let's talk about sort of the ethics of theft. So, what in essence, what does it mean to steal content? Is it just to restream it? Is it to download it and keep it on your computer just for your watching? Let's kind of define this concept of stealing, and I'll start off with Chris here to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's interesting. I was doing a talk yesterday, and I was talking a little bit about this problem. And I gave an example. So imagine you go to a millennial or someone like that and you say, hey, let's go out to Walmart. And we're in Walmart and we walk by and there's a DVD there or a Blu-ray or some piece of content you really want to watch. And it's there and it's got a price tag on it. And I asked them, would you take that DVD and stick it in your pocket and walk out of the store? And unanimously, there was a cord cutter study that just came back and they said, no, of course not. We wouldn't do that. That's wrong. That's stealing. But then we hop in our car and we drive back to the house and we turn on the TV and then we go stream that exact same movie that I wouldn't walk out of the store for with, and we say, well, is that stealing? Because the media is just different, right? It came streaming in or I had it on media. And the perception is that there's a whole generation of folks that don't see that as stealing. I think over 53% of people on a couple of studies I read, and that consistently runs in the 50% range, don't consider that wrong. And that's a problem, right? So if you think about that and think about the mentality, if you grew up with free content, you grew up with getting things on the internet, you grew up with apps where I gave you a little bit of my personal information, I get everything free, or I went to torrent sites and I went out there and I pulled down any of the content I want, that's the culture that we have today, and folks just expect things for free. And so, and not necessarily free with an ad tech model where I'm getting advertising supporting it, I'm just gonna go stream the video I want and go get it. So I think the ethics need to be, and the education needs to be, is it wrong? And is it there, right? And you can't legislate it. We tried that in the music industry, right? The music industry said, hey, you know what? This whole Napster thing isn't gonna work for us. Let's go out and go after those people and go make examples of them. In fact, there was a really interesting article this morning where it came out and said, NBA and Ultimate Fighting and all that, they were getting together and they were gonna try to legislate and make this a felony as opposed to a misdemeanor streaming video. And I don't know that's the right answer, but I think culturally people just don't understand or don't care that that's wrong, and I think that norm is pervasive across multiple continents and multiple folks.
Oh, very interesting. Before we jump in, how many people out here in the audience, there's so many of you, raise your hand, how many people have stolen a piece of content? Got there? Raise your hands. I'm keeping my
I don't
hand.
believe y'all.
I've stolen
Everybody in this audience must have watched something at one time, right?
I have, yeah. That's interesting. What do you guys have to say about that? Anything to add?
Well, I mean, Olga and I were having a conversation over lunch, and we're trying to figure out, there's a lot of gray areas around what's piracy and what's not. So she gave the example of, if you download content to your iPad and then go to a different country that doesn't have the geographic rights to it, and then you tunnel back into this country where you downloaded it, is that is that piracy? Because, you originally couldn't. But I think as an industry, we make it confusing for the consumers as well, because we make it hard sometimes for them to get the content that they want. And that leads people to then trying to find it somewhere, because you're taught, just Google it and you'll find it.
Yep.
And they often do. And once you find it, you click on it. So, I think we're making it hard on consumers to figure out what's right, what's wrong. There are sites that look really good that are pirated sites. Consumers don't know. But yeah.
And I also think that sharing passwords doesn't help because the same example as you just gave, if I walk into a store and buy an apple and carry 12 out and then sell them all, people are gonna go, that's wrong. But if I walk in a store and buy an apple and I get 4 for free, I can give you one, I can give you one, I can give you one, and I can sell another one. And that technically isn't illegal, is it? So I think there needs to be more rules to define all of that.
And that's important. I think that's something we probably overlook as an industry, is helping consumers understand what is theft, right? What does it mean to steal a piece of content? I talked to a friend who was in Canada, and all over Canada you'll find these little signs on the road that say, thousands of channels for $9.99 a month. He's like, oh, well, I'm a streaming guy, so I'm going to find out about that. So he calls one up, and it's a Kodi box. So if you're not familiar with Kodi, it's basically a software package that's installed on these little ARM boxes that is used for streaming. And so he got this, he called up the number and he's like, hey, I kind of want you to, I kind of want to buy this thing. It sounds great. $9.99 a month. That's awesome. How much is the box? He's like, oh, it's a $100 box. It's, $9.99 a month, and we'll come to your house and install it for you. And he's like, is this legit? Like, am I breaking any laws? No, it's totally legit. Yes, no problem. And this is the issue, right? Is I think there's such a gray area. Consumers just don't understand.
But Canada's different as well, right? You're not doing something illegal, getting streaming. If you're the pirate streaming it, it's illegal in Canada. But in Canada, the legislation is different. I can receive it. I could sign up for that service all day long, and I'm really not doing anything maybe immoral. It may be something different,
Again,
but it may not be illegal.
Right, and that's the issue, right? So what do the operators have to do? What can they do? What can content rights holders do when that Cody box is actually the streamer is located in the Ukraine or Poland or some country that really doesn't care about cease and desist orders? You know, that's a major problem, right? So let's move on to this next question, because this is actually kind of dovetails into it. But you know, what does the state of video stream piracy look like today? You know, like how much is being stolen? You know, do we have sort of an idea of the common methods of theft? And you know, let's start off with Matt, since you're working very closely with you know, a lot of the cable operators.
Well, as an industry, we're still working on actually getting better numbers on that. The industry would like a good answer to that. We have some reports that have come out in the past that put the number lower than what you heard, but you know, Sandvine published a report 2 years ago that said about 6.5% in North America use pirated content. We've heard reports in the UK with the English Premier Soccer League that it's as high as 20%. So, you know, we're trying to figure out what that number is, because people are trying to figure out, you know, what is the business case for what they got to do? How much do they have to invest to remedy this problem, or is it just kind of noise down there at the bottom? So that's the first step. And so we're working on getting better numbers. We're hoping that there would be a report published later this year that will have some fresher numbers in it. So we're going to see that. We're working with our member companies to get better data. And as an industry, we're developing better tools to, you know, get that data, because most of the operators aren't all that instrumented in finding this, nor are the content owners. It's just kind of running open loop. And so it's kind of like, hey, we need to figure out how to measure this so we can figure out, get a baseline, so then we can figure out if anything that we're doing remedies the problem, or if we have to take it to, you know, raise the ante.
Absolutely. But Olga?
I've heard crazy numbers, up to the point where some live sports events say up to 40% of revenue is lost on piracy. So I can't even fathom a number like that and losing that much revenue on a large-scale event. So if that's the case, whatever cost is that you put in to remedy that situation really can't be as crazy as losing 40% of revenue on a sporting event.
No, exactly. Especially considering the costs that companies are paying rights holders to get access to those sporting events in specific geographic areas. That's nuts.
And I don't know if this is a anecdotal figure, but this was an example brought up to us during a meeting, which somebody said, yeah, and this is the numbers we've come up across.
Oh. Great.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the common looking at the problem across the entire footprint's been hard. Right? We're spending a lot of time right now working with large tier ones, working with the leadership, because they hear vendors come in, we're a vendor, and say, oh my gosh, there's a problem. And you know, take any of the numbers you said, the smaller number or the 40% number, and you say, oh my gosh, this is a bad problem. And you can also go to the media companies and do the same thing. And what they're doing right now is saying, let's holistically start figuring this out. How do we get to start partnering and working with other folks to figure this out across the footprint? And so we're spending a lot of time kind of figuring it out. And when you go to the sporting events, it's something high value. It's interesting because one of the things I ask is, who cares? Because the content owners certainly care. They don't want their content out there. And you know, maybe some CEOs and stuff will say, hey, Game of Thrones being pirated is awesome for us. It's going to generate more revenue. It's a viral video type of effect. But you also look at the thing of where this problem is going to be in the revenue. We need to come back and point that to them and say, hey, look, we saw an example from Synamedia's point of view in Indonesia, where there's so much content getting pirated in sports events that folks don't want to buy that high quality content and pay the exclusive rights. Because if I can go get the exclusive rights, why would I go pay millions of dollars to tie up this content?
Yep. And
then, oh, by the way, you're just going to get it free, or you're going to go pay $5 a month for some subscription service to get this event. And so ultimately, the subscribers, when they get educated, they're going to learn. It's going to hurt them. And we're not quite there yet, but we've started seeing it in markets where piracy is prevalent. Indonesia is an example where it's really high levels and people are not carrying events anymore. They don't want to carry that, and that's significant change.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, it goes back again to the first question we asked, right? It's about education. We're just not educating our consumers, our viewers enough for them to really understand the impact of piracy on them. What about the technology? So let's talk about that a little bit. There's lots of technology in the space right now to prevent theft, right? So there's watermarking, and obviously that has a forensic component to it. There's DRM. There's different settings and configurations for how things stream. So one of the big issues, and maybe we can take a step back first and ask the question about streaming versus VOD. But let's really talk about some of the technology. And first, would you say that more theft right now is happening with on-demand content or with streaming, with live streaming? Anybody want to jump on that? I mean, anybody see anything like that?
I don't know if we have a number. I mean, I think from our perspective, we're more concerned about the streaming.
Yeah.
Most people that I talk to that are kind of new to the conversation are more aware of the VOD and the Cody model.
Yep.
But I think we're more concerned about the live streaming for when you get to the sporting events, the high value content that's live or linear streamed in first runs.
Okay, so let's focus this technological conversation on live. So Olga, let's start with you, since you represent a streaming security technology company. What kind of things can content owners, distributors, whatever, implement to prevent theft?
Well, I think part of it is we have to know why there is theft.
Okay.
Is it because in order for me to watch 4 different shows I like, I have to have 4 different subscriptions? And it's just eventually between that and my linear television just starting to cost way too much money? Or is it because when I travel, I can't see the show, like we were talking with Matt earlier, I can't see the shows that I'm technically supposed to be watching just because I'm traveling? Or is there any other underlying reason for it? And I feel like once you know the reasons, you can start to combat this issue. And it can be as simple as applying DRM technology, which in my opinion, I would call it active security. This is the security that says, yes, you can play, no, you cannot play. Forensic watermarking, it goes very well with DRM because I would call it passive security, because that's the kind of security that eventually, once it gets out there, if it gets out there, you can kind of figure out who released it and whatnot. But there also have to be things that address the subscription issue. Why do I have to pay a whole monthly subscription to Netflix if I only want to watch one show? If all I care about is Stranger Things, then why do I care about anything else? Maybe it'd be easier to, instead of going from a monthly subscription, allow me to pay for one show. And once that show is done, I don't have to pay anymore, because if that's all I'm watching.
Yep.
Or change more of the logic with geo-travel and allow me to do things like, if I have an US-based iPad and I have a US-based credit card, then I have to authenticate my device somehow. And when I travel, I can continue to watch my US-based content. But those are bigger rights holder issues. And I think all of it between the tech and the bigger global scheme of things is what we have to look into.
Chris, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. On the technology front, I think if you think technology solves a problem alone, you lost already. You start just thinking it's a technology problem, you're done.
Perfect.
I mean, that's clearly wrong. There's components, we see the notorious market report come out. And oh, by the way, we see traction. We can see the slope slowing down a little bit on some of the live streaming stuff, right? We see folks like China arresting hundreds of people in these big sweeps because they're getting political pressure. So I think that's one angle of it. From a Synamedia point of view, and going all the way back from our NDS days and all that, we believe in having our teams be involved. We have OPSEC teams that proactively do things. So when you have a high value piece of content that's going to be, let's say, linear sports, there's 2 things you do. One of the things we proactively engage a few weeks ahead of time. We get in the ecosystems, try to figure out where the content is. And then we'll use technology to do things like analysis of flows and things going on. So it's obviously we have DRM, and we have all the components there in the solution, but it's no single thing that's going to win this.
No silver bullet.
And then the other thing I think is interesting along with what you just said is if I look at, I think it's the European Soccer League or Bundesliga. I mean, when you interviewed, I read some interviews a couple of years ago, and they were talking about the reason people pirate it is they care about our content. We just need to make it available in every country. And if we make it available and it's a good user experience, we're going to be there, right? And so that's another thread, and another thing that you need to do. So it's just you don't just go buy a solution. I don't sell you a security solution. Even as a vendor, I'd love to do that, but we don't do that. We need multiple facets here to make this problem reduce or make it better and easier to live with.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the problem, let me jump to you just a second, Matt. Obviously the technology is not perfect, right? So we're talking about geo restriction. So how many of you had an experience where you want to watch something in another region and it's been blacked out? Yeah. So one of the biggest problems that content distributors face with GeoIP, with using GeoIP, is the freshness of the data. So sometimes things will they screw up in the data. And so you have rights to watch something, you go to watch it, and it's blacked out. You're like, whoa, I'm in region, I have rights, it's not working. And then you're screaming at the content owner, you're screaming at the distributor. And so this is a problem, is that the technology is not perfect. So Matt, you wanna add some? What are your members using, technologically? Anything interesting or?
I don't think we're using anything interesting that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I know, I've heard of some experiments with some different kind of watermarks where they've been trying to figure out who's restreaming or uploading, where they will do the equivalent almost like personalized ad insertion, so that it will show up on the person's house and it'll have something that identifies them, and it will be in the stream momentarily. So then the piracy monitoring services will go, oh, we know exactly what household that's now coming from.
Yeah, we're absolutely doing that with rapid watermarking, right? So we're doing client-based watermarking to the set-top box, and when the OPSEC team figures out who it is, when the event starts, we'll do it, whether it's OPAT, whether you can see the watermark or not, we'll do a watermark that's very hard to remove, but click it up during the event and try to catch it. Because the window of value is so short in a sporting event. If I'm 10 minutes into a game, the value keeps dropping as long as the event goes, so I need to catch that in real time. And that stuff is we're certainly working with North American operators and European operators doing that now.
So I thought that was kind of interesting because, the watermarking itself, people are always trying to circumvent it. So when it's more like this, people are unaware, but it helps the content
watermarking's
owners.
changed, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at watermarking from a contractual obligation, right? If I'm an operator and my job is to distribute content, really what I want is a checkbox. I want to say, hey, because I meet Movie Lab stuff, check, I got it, watermarking. And who cares if I can go spend $1,600 and buy a device that's going to take all the watermarking out, because I've met the checkbox, so I met the legal requirement.
Yep.
We look at it different. We're saying, well, no, there's high value content. I don't care if I got Movie Lab certification. I don't even care if it's GoldenEye. What I want to do is take that high value event and be able to identify that set-top box in real time and shut it down and disrupt the pirates, because I can't stop pirates.
Right.
But what I can do is make the pirate experience worse than just going to buy the content. Because if I care about the sporting event and it keeps going out, I'm probably going to just go pay for the stream and watch a high quality experience, because that's what I want. I want to see the content. I want it to be available. So our philosophy is just disrupt it, make it a bad user experience. Hurt their business.
See, that's a very great approach to it. I mean, I've had conversations with security folks in the industry, and we have in our organization, we have, I think, 4 of the 5 biggest watermarking vendors, and we have these conversations about sort of, what can you do? Because you can shut down a pirate, like, shut down their CDN account. So let's say they're using CDN 777 or one of the small credit card CDNs. Content rights holder gets, access to the forensic watermarking, realizes that's being pirated, shut down that account. So the small CDN shuts it down. What happens? The pirate just pops up on another CDN. This is the problem, right? It's just super hard to prevent theft. And so the question becomes well, how else can you make theft bad? And you make it a horrible user experience.
Well, I also think that it matters if the end consumer, for one thing, knows they're watching pirated content and cares if they're watching pirated content. Because if you go and sign up with a company that gives you everything for 10 hours a month and you don't quite realize it's pirated content, it's one thing. But if you want to watch the latest, pick a TV show, any TV show, or a movie that just came out, but you really, for your family of 4, cannot afford to go and buy the popcorn and the blah, 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 you need to get, and you just buy a pirated version, and it's a pirated version, you don't really care if somebody's walking through the screen or whatever, because you know what you're getting.
Right.
So I think part of it is also knowing if your consumers are going to care, if they're good, if you get out of live and go to VOD, if they're going to report this as a pirated version or whatever.
Yep.
I think you kind of have to combat that part as well and make it easier to get high quality content and somehow cheaper maybe as well, to a certain extent, as opposed to having to fight pirates.
Right, exactly. So, leading off of that question, and it's actually kind of interesting because we've touched on it, but, is there a way to turn piracy to a content distributor's advantage? So rather than making it negative, right? So people, let's just say this is crazy, but there's going to be piracy, period, end of discussion. So the content owner can say, you know what? I'm willing to lose 0.5% of my revenue or 1% of my revenue to piracy as long as I prevent the other 11% or 10% or 39% that I was experiencing before. I'm okay with that. It's an acceptable loss. So is there a way that they can, is there a way content distributors can sort of turn that around to them to say, let's use this to our advantage. Let's use piracy as a way to,
Marketing tool.
get more subscribers, whatever. Chris, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we see that a lot with our credential sharing, right? So credential sharing we do with some big data policy, and we try to figure out, we generate these risk scores, right? So we say, well, this is somebody that's generally a good person. Maybe your kid went to college and they're still using it, but they're still 30 years old, and they're still on your plan, and they're still mooching your credentials. And so we kind of look at this, and what we say, and we were showing this at NAB, it was kind of cool, is we would go that, generate risk scores, and then we'd come back and say, you know what? What if you could do a targeted marketing campaign at somebody that may actually not know they're buying stuff illegally, they may actually be good actors in generally, they're not trying to be bad actors, and we say, hey, why don't we run a specific program that says, hey, we'll upsell you to multiple more account numbers, or we'll sell you a different package. And we actually did this where we did the workflows all put in, and this is one of the ones we were able to automate and show that. And based on policy-based, we'd say, oh, that guy, he's probably a bad actor. He's probably doing some really bad things based on a bunch of metrics we pulled out of the big data. And we'd say, let's just shut that one down. But the other ones, let's send something across the screen and say, hey, you're watching pirated content, or hey, we'd love to upsell you. We noticed that you have more sign-ins than you're supposed to have, or you're in a different geographic region or whatever, and we give them a chance to upsell. So it really is an opportunity to take and turn that revenue around, because what we do see, and we've seen this globally, is we'll see people buy pirated sites. They're really good. I mean, you go, they look really good. And oh, by the way, they take American Express, they take Visa, they take PayPal. And when you can't set the thing up, you can actually get a support person. You can send them a text. You can actually call someone, and someone answers the phone, or they'll help you set the thing up. And it's better than my cable company. Yeah, exactly. It's a great user experience. Yeah. And oh, by the way, it is my cable company, but I just don't know that. And so there's people that don't see that. And by educating them, there's a number of people that don't really want to be doing this, that will do it. But I think it does go to your point, is if it's $5 a month and I've only got so many dollars to spend on it, I might need a competing product there as well. So it's maybe offering some other products as well and making the content available.
And one of the things we've been talking about is that if you know what's getting pirated, it actually feeds into your marketing to understand what is the demand by the consumers, because if there's something that they can't get, maybe it should be offered. And if there's stuff that people are not watching, well, don't offer it, go get the stuff that people do want to watch. So there's a way to kind of get to the win out of it.
Anything to add, Olga?
No, I think the guys pretty much covered it.
Yeah, I want to harp on that sort of acceptable loss. I mean, when you look at the retail world today, like an actual storefront where people walk in and buy things, physical products, those companies all have an acceptable loss number, right? That, hey, people are going to shoplift. Things are going to disappear like accidentally in carts. We're okay with that being some percent of product. I think that content owners may have to take that same approach and use sort of these other mechanisms of turning that piracy around to be something positive and getting all these not really bad actors, just kind of people in the gray area, to sort of become good actors, and then then maybe it all works out. So Matt, obviously you're sort of in the middle of the industry with all these cable operators and with the FCC and all these folks, and sort of what has the industry done to date in terms of solving this problem from a standards or specifications point of view?
Well, we're trying to do a bunch of different things, but I think on the FCC side, so we've worked with the FCC and they've come out with an enforcement action earlier this year that basically a lot of the companies that make these streaming boxes are just putting the little FCC certification logo on it, even though they haven't registered and certified it.
Right.
So the FCC announced they're going to crack down on that, and it's like a $150,000 fine. And now we're working with the customs people to actually catch the stuff when it gets imported. Earlier, we asked the FCC, asked the big e-commerce sites, Amazon and eBay, you know, don't permit the sale of boxes that are fully loaded. So they agreed to try to limit the sale of those.
Oh, good.
We've also worked directly with some of them, and now if you try to go to Amazon and or search for a fully loaded Kodi, you won't find any results.
Wow.
So they've trying to make it harder. So we're trying to make it harder as part of it, just instead of, you know, as a multi-approach of improve the security, but also make it more expensive for the pirates. You know, if we can make it harder to import the boxes and sell the boxes. We're also, there's some efforts with the company that makes one of the popular streaming boxes. They also still have legal customers who buy it.
Right.
So they're now acknowledging and trying to work with put mechanisms in place to prevent it from getting used improperly.
Oh, it's great.
And then the industry's now recognized that if you kind of look in the standard space for content security, there's not a lot of published standards out there, right? I mean, it's kind of very specialized, and you know, there's some stuff in the W3C stuff. There's some stuff buried down the IETF stuff, but nothing that glues it all together. So, you know, we're working with the Streaming Video Alliance and others to kind of take a first crack at putting something together to put some guidance in place so that it's more than the tick the box kind of, because I think what we're seeing is a lot of, I've ticked all the boxes and people are saying to their boss, I ticked all the boxes, we're good, and they never look again to, I think your conversation that you heard at lunch of, oh, DRM's hard, so we didn't do it.
Yep.
Well, and that's part of the problem with the FCC right now. The FCC, all the standards are for broadcast, right? So the issue is there's no standards for streaming really. And because of that, and there's no stream theft in broadcast, so it suddenly becomes, there's this issue of like, how do we solve this problem from a standards point of view?
And making legislation is hard,
Very.
expensive, and you often get it wrong. So we're also,
But it's also hard because of the global footprint of the internet,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So you talked about the FCC regulation, which is just new. Europeans were already ahead of that, right? They already had that for the set-top box in the European Union. But it's a global problem, and it affects us here in the US, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter where you are. If you're anywhere in a safe harbor kind of country, or you can protect yourself, you talked about where, you know, where the caches are, where
Yep.
the origins are. So we can do all the great legislation we want, but you really need to unite to do it. And you're right on the economic side as well, right? If there's economic pressure to drive it down, it makes the problem different,
Yes.
right? I mean, the people streaming are doing it because it's a good business model, right? They just want to make model. Their cost of goods is almost zero. I go steal your screens. It's a great way to make money, right? It's a really good business model, and it's really about making that not a good business model, and it's about pressure. It's whether it's political pressure, economic pressure. It's about education, because then the consumer doesn't have the demand and you're killing the market space. And that's the only way you can address the problem.
And I think on the same topic, if you make it on the legal side, if you make it as easy to get as possible and as economical as possible, and maybe having paid for content and ad-driven content and whatever else, so that consumers don't have to go, well, I have to spend this much money.
Well, that's interesting, right? That's a change that we're seeing. And even at this conference, I heard speakers talk about this, is where we're having original content, and we're almost reinventing TV the way we had it before, where we're saying, hey, well, maybe we're going to take that out of our closed ecosystem because we don't have the aggregators anymore, and let's drive an ad-driven revenue stream and take that content out and make it available. So, because otherwise, nobody can afford to have, you know, the 50 channels of premium content that you want to watch. And if you talk to millennials and younger, what they're going to tell you is, like, I already paid for one or two, so I don't feel guilty about having to borrow credentials or watch that other show or two, because there's a lot of good content out there, right?
yeah,
They really don't. There's no.
or they think that
But they've already paid. So they feel
like
good.
I bought a cable thing, it's on cable, so I should be able to get it over here too, right? And
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit then about the technology part. We've got about 10 minutes left, and you know, one of the things that we've seen in the industry is lots of conversation about new technologies to apply to security. One of those would be AI, right? So can we use AI to do sniffing and logs, to predict, to do things like that? And the other is maybe it's like blockchain, right? Can we use blockchain to better secure pieces of content to really identify, who the appropriate person is to actually view that content? So, Olga, let's start with you. But I mean, obviously, EZDRM is doing a lot of cool stuff. Are you guys experimenting with any new technologies?
So what we do is basically straight up DRM. We are not the company that decides who gets to watch the content.
Sure.
So I feel like AI would probably be somewhere down the line helpful in being able to determine bad actors versus good actors. But at the end of the day, a good actor can turn out to be a bad actor and vice versa. And at the end of the day, when the content does get to the end user, there still has to be DRM or some sort of security to prevent this content from being pirated down the line. So I think maybe down the line, possible. At this point, I think it's just more of a buzzword.
Chris, have you seen anything like that? Or?
Yeah, so I see a couple things. I think you got to be careful with AI, right? Because it's a buzzword. It's like saying cloud. It's
AI.
Right? So I see today a lot more machine learning and kind of more where there are humans involved in directing it and a lot of learning and things. Like you said, behaviors change, right? You can do really interesting things. If you understand the Pirates ecosystem, if you look at the temperature of boxes and where they're on and the time and records, you can figure out a whole lot of stuff. But you really need to interpret and make that valuable. So I see a lot of investment there. I do see things coming with streaming and flow analysis. A lot of that kind of technology is really emerging. That's pretty exciting stuff. And there's a few startups out there doing things with blockchain. You talked about what if you could just buy a piece of content and you only wanted that piece of content? Well, if I had a public immutable chain of custody, basically, of the content, I could do that. I could now take my piece of content and let you buy this or buy that, put it in a blockchain, and I know exactly where it went. That's really early.
Yeah.
I think, if you say, what's 2, 3, 5 years out, we're kind of in the infancy. There's a few companies out there. I don't know if we're quite ready for prime time with it. I know that even our R&D people look at those kind of things, but we're probably not productizing that stuff right now. It's more just, that's kind of interesting. It's got some legs. Let's figure out where it goes.
And one thing that we've been looking at with the companies is how to apply machine learning, supervised machine learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's a lot of technology doing that in the cyberspace for identifying malware.
Yep.
And so if we're just saying, okay, just change the word malware to video piracy and insert, can you find it? Well, turns out you can. And so we're working with companies to see if we can get that productized as a way to be able to sniff it right out on the fly.
Yeah, I think there's definitely still a lot of human intervention needed for, data analysis. I mean, I talked to one of our member companies, big content owner, and he was telling me that they really look at logs and they have thresholds for logins, for example. And they see somebody logging in a lot of times from a lot of different places. Maybe somebody needs to reach out to that user. Maybe we'll just cut their account off and let them contact us. So if they're a pirate, they're not going to contact them, right? They're just going to be like, I got caught, I'll go somewhere else. But if they're a legitimate user whose credentials might have been compromised or stolen, the user will reach back out and go, hey, why'd you cut off my account? Well, we noticed this, and we'll light you up again, change your password, and then if it happens again, well, they probably know that was a bad actor who was just being,
And that's the big data angle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's like with credential sharing, we do that. That's why I say you get scores.
Yep.
And one of the
the
score
scoring
things
thing's
is
cool.
like you come in and say, hey, we just locked your account. We want you to call us to turn it back on. Or now you got to use two-factor authentication. Yeah, it's inconvenient for the normal user, but if you're a bad actor and you're doing something illegal, so what if it's inconvenient? The operator shouldn't care, but we want to have a high degree of confidence.
Right.
And I think the key there is, with big data, it doesn't solve all problems. You need a really specific problem set, and you need to be able to take the noise out of the data. And that's where the human comes in, because there's just too much data. You really need to figure out what's valuable data.
Exactly.
And that's where we're kind of in the early stages, because I don't know that for this application that a lot of companies are there yet.
No, I'd say they're probably not. I mean, I think that's where we're seeing a lot of sort of machine learning, applications looking at, because right now, for all intents and purposes, it's Mechanical Turk. I mean, it's a fleet of people looking at data and then making decisions and implementing changes based on that. But if you can get a smart algorithm that can see patterns, or that can be programmed to look at patterns across data sets and notice when people are doing bad things, like seems to be like what you guys are really starting to do, that's cool stuff.
It's fun.
So last question we've got here, and then I'll open it up really quickly to see if we have any audience questions. You know, the future landscape of security technology. Obviously, stuff is changing. You know, I think we agree that there's no silver bullet. So, you know, really the approach is kind of a layered approach, right? Multiple technologies all working together across vendors and partners in order to prevent, you know, as much theft as possible. But, you know, what might we see in a couple of years or 2 or 3 years? You know, are things going to drastically change? Will we see better education? You know, what might the security landscape look like? And we'll just start with Chris and kind of go down the line.
So I think a couple things. I think on the legislation front, I think you're going to see continued pressure on the government front. I think you're going to see governments getting pressured to do more. There's just too many $1 billion at stake. Even though we can't quantify definitively, everything I read has got these huge numbers, right?
Yeah.
So people know it's big. We don't know exactly how big, but we know it's big. So I think there's pressure there. I think you will see dramatic improvements on moving further out and aggressively going after things. So right where takedown notices didn't work, perhaps you're going to work more closely with the CDNs to get their content down or understand the flows, or as soon as a show fires up or someone's watching a sporting event, we'll notice the traffic. The machine learning can pick that up. I can understand, oh, all of a sudden there's a big growth and I understand where the content is. I think you're going to continue to see that as well. And then you're going to see more policy type driven things where we can automate more and more, because as we get more mature, then we need less human intervention during time. I don't think it's ever going to be a silver bullet, but I think you will see more automation. You'll see things like where the credential sharing just becomes norm. Everybody has a baseline and we watch it, and you're going to see it across the ecosystems. Right now, part of the problem is the weakest link. You know, we have ubiquitous content everywhere, but not everybody's on the security bandwagon yet. Not everybody's concerned. I have operators that ask me, why do I care? Right? And as long as they don't care, that means their content's going to get out. And it's the same shows, it's the same sporting events, the same things you want.
Yep.
And so we're probably going to have to see more of a global approach or a more of a unified approach.
Yeah, it's tough when sporting events, when there's 8 camera operators from 4 different content providers, and it's like all of them have to be secure, or all of them, you know, suffer because one's not.
Yeah.
Olga.
Well, on the technology side, we haven't really talked much about the actual tech side of it. I think the CMAF format coming in with more of unified CBC encryption would make it easier on the streaming side of things. And once you make it easier and you no longer have to worry about 2 different types of streams, and it's just one more unified streams, it makes things easier to digest and process and take care of. But I also think it's a question of identifying, like we talked, identifying specific problems and figuring out what the cost of it, of addressing those problems. Like you get password sharing, you can force people to keep resetting passwords. Or is it much better to say if your phone is fingerprint function, like has a fingerprint function, then in order to log in, you have to use a fingerprint. And now you can no longer force a person to enter a password. Or would that actually lose you business? And I think identifying aspects that are preventing theft versus preventing business is where we're kind of working with too as well.
Interesting. Matt.
I don't know if I really don't know what other technology is going to come. I do think, I guess at the end of the day, I think we're going to see an improvement because there's a recognition that we need to do better. So I think we'll see an improvement in the defense in depth approach that you talked about, the layers.
Yep.
And I think what Chris was pointing out, I do think we will see broader applications of machine learning and big data analytics to the problem, because I think, you know, you can make a lot of headway with that.
Sure. So really quickly, are there any questions for our panelists way back there? Did we hear that?
I couldn't hear it.
No, I couldn't hear that either.
Yeah, because somebody's talking behind the wall at the same time.
Right. Okay, so are you familiar with Elgato?
Personally, no.
So it's a content recording tool? Okay, so the question is how would you prevent users from employing that to record your content? Would the answer to that be just, you know, watermarking? Does it strip watermarks out? No.
Is it just a piece of software?
In piece of software, yeah.
It's a piece of software that is DRM compliant?
Well, hardware.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, the watermarking, the ship's already sailed, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you want to prevent that, it's a bit hard to do, right? I mean, we try to do that, you know, even if you looked in the history, like, you know, we had HDMI, we said, hey, we better put some encryption in there, we're gonna make it tough. And then you just go buy a $20 downgrader and you pull the encryption right back off, and then you go pipe it into wherever you want to go. So I mean, it's really not hard to get around that. And people are always ingenious to do that. I think, you know, watermarking gives you a chance to figure out where it's leaking, where it came from. So, you know, if you do that off your set-top box, I'm going to probably realize it was exactly your set-top box, whether it was AVR streaming or whether it was legacy CAS, because we're going to look at all that. I think where you were going, if it's other tools where it's inside, let's say you have an Android box and you've rooted it and things, your DRM better look and make sure that, hey, you really can play this. Is that rooted? Is this in a safe space? Are you a good behaved app? Are you doing the things you're supposed to be? But if you're doing it outside, it's better, you know, can we encrypt the things and can we control the player and can we do things at that layer and make sure that you can't go strip it off later? I mean, that's about the only chance you have.
Yeah, because that would seem like a tough thing with DRM, right? Because I have a piece of software. Well, I'm admitting this. I have a piece of software that strips the DRM off of iTunes, right? So I buy all my movies through iTunes and I want them on my Plex server. Well, I can't do that because of fair play. So I have a piece of software that basically records the output of the iTunes playback into an MP4 container that I can put on my Plex server, which is DRM-less. And I don't distribute it all. That's not my point. The point is I just want to watch it all on my Plex with all of my movies. So that's a tough thing to stop. I mean, you know, how do you prevent people from re-recording a stream that's DRM'd if you have the rights to the DRM, like you've, you know, purchased a piece of content or you got a piece of content from somebody, you watch it, you re-record it, and you distribute it out, you know, to everybody.
But I think that also brings up an interesting point. If you don't redistribute it, you own the rights to it, and
Is
you
that
watch
theft?
it at home, is that theft?
See, I think
I would
no.
argue it's not.
Yeah.
Because as long as you're not making money off of it down the line, you're not throwing it up somewhere for people to watch for free or whatever, as long as it's for your own personal use, is that really theft?
Right, and we
And-
saw that with DVDs, right?
And I don't think it
Once
is.
they were cracked, that you know, there was that whole case years ago, right? We've already seen this movie.
Well, I even remember, I think it was Windows Media DRM way back when allowed you to download into an MP3 format, which would basically rip out DRM for your own personal use. So you can put it up on an MP3 player that was not Windows Media DRM compliant.
Exactly. All right. I'm sorry, we've got to run. We got to wrap it up. I'm sorry, I apologize. Listen, if we can give a round of applause for our panelists, did a great job. Good conversation. Thank you.